Welcome back, everyone. We are so excited to be in Southern California today, and we're at the Institute for Creative Technologies right here at the University of Southern California, and we're meeting with Clarke Lethin. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and the lab as well?
Oh, okay. That might take a little bit. So
That's fine.
28 years in the Marine Corps, retired a little over 10 years ago in 2008 as a colonel. I ended up down at the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. Fortunate in my last 10 years of being on active duty to be involved in some of our operations overseas, from Afghanistan early on in 2001. With the invasion of Iraq and then going back into Iraq. When I retired, I started working for the Office of Naval Research on a large program looking at immersive technologies for training with the infantry, from virtual reality to mixed reality and Hollywood effects to augmented reality. Did that, helped manage their human performance training education portfolio. Through that time there, I met the folks here at the Institute for Creative Technologies, and a little over 6 years ago, I took a job with the Institute to help manage the Institute and assist these great researchers with the work they were doing and how that could be transitioned and implemented with the needs of the Army, but all of the services, all of our services. Really, the Institute does basic research all the way through developing advanced prototypes that are able to be fielded, and a number of those systems have been fielded to the Navy and to the Army, even the Marine Corps, and are in use today or have been in use in courses, looking at using different mediums and different techniques and leveraging technologies that were advancing when this place started almost 20 years ago.
It's been that long.
Been that long. 20. We had our 20-year anniversary just a few weeks ago. And how do you leverage that to make training more effective, more efficient, both in assessment? So I kind of look at how do we take what Hollywood does and use that for better training, better learning, better educational experiences, and even into the behavior modification, which we've done with the systems we've created for helping clinicians treat folks with post-traumatic stress. So there's a little more in between, but that's probably sufficient.
Well, you cover a lot of areas, right? So, let's unpack a little bit of it.
Okay.
So, basic research. What is the difference between basic research, or let me say it this way: what's the pipeline of how research moves through? A lot of people don't know what does basic research look like versus what we typically term 6-4, where it's applied and it's starting to move into the.
Yeah, that's something we deal with all the time. So and it's taken me a while to really learn the equation. I kind of refer to it now as basic research creates knowledge. From that knowledge, I may be able to find something where I can create an application, a piece of the puzzle. Then, when I have a need, I can take the pieces of the puzzle and make a picture. That becomes your prototype. Or training application or system, if we're talking that allows you to be able to implement it, assess it, collect the data, make sure it's doing what you've defined it to do. So 6-1, basic research, create knowledge. 6-2 is the applied research, taking that to a place where I could potentially use it, but I just don't know how yet, and then taking all those pieces, putting them together, and creating prototypes that I get in front of the actual users I intend to influence and change or modify behavior, or improve behaviors, and that's where you see that continuum. 6-4 research, that's kind of hardening some kind of application so it's shrink wrapped and I can begin to deploy it in an industrial scale. But that's and I think when you talk about basic research, what needs to be and what we really focus on, it should be use-inspired basic research.
I like that term.
Not just doing research for the sake of research, because it's valuable taxpayer dollars, and not that we shouldn't be doing research for just discovering things we don't have a clue about. But in our case, in the Department of Defense and the Army, it's like, hey, if I think I need something 10, 15, 20 years from now, I need to create some knowledge necessary to be able to realize what that is. So in the future, I've got something that comes out.
Yeah, so that plays into my next question, which is really, why don't we just turn this over to industry, right? Why can't they just build out what we see as a needed use. Why is it that we need to have research? Because I know there's a lot of people who talk a lot about the expensive hammer, for example. Right?
Yeah, right.
Why is it so expensive? And the assumption is that it's because we have a bureaucracy that allows money to move through very, very slowly. Part of it is because there's a reason we step through these hoops, and the reason where we test things before we just send them out to the field.
Yeah, I think when you look at that equation, and if you think about what industry has done, what industry has created and the products that they've created is based on the foundation of government-invested basic research dollars for all those years. So if we want to be looking 2 and 3 ridge lines out in the future, if we don't continue to do this basic research, we're going to be relying on, well, no one's going to create that knowledge. And if it's industry has a very short timeline because they have quarterly profit margins and statements they have to put out. So they're very near-term focused. They do have some internally invested research dollars, and I don't take that away from them, but they're really not going to make the discoveries. Case in point, I think I visited Oakland Research Labs back when I was at the Office of Naval Research, and I'm listening to them talk about all this research they do, and it was amazing. And then the one thing that really hit home was the SAPI plate, is that we're the ones who did the basic research and the research necessary to improve the manufacturing process that has allowed industry to mass produce viable and effective SAPI plates, the body armor.
Right.
At the same time, I'm also listening to the industry telling me how they say they have this unique process for creating a SAPI plate, and they're the only ones in the world. And I hear that from a couple of industry partners that said, okay, now I get the equation. Government is really creating the know-how, the knowledge, the way industry is taking advantage of that, and they're the ones that are pulling it through and doing things. And that's not, you don't see those success stories all the time because there's, as they call that, valley of death. Research we take to this point, industry's over here, no one's building the footbridges in between.
Exactly right. And one of the things I did while I was in government was to look at, across all the departments and agencies, the innovation groups that existed. And a lot of people don't realize we have 179 innovation groups inside government. To which I usually get, you mean we even have one? I said, we don't just have one, we have many. And some of these might be a small team, right? In Treasury, we have a fairly small team. But when you get into energy, for example, you're going to have very large, very robust, very deep groups, and that you're going to have sites that will be doing extensive research. In DoD, of course, we see the same thing. That doesn't even begin to talk about a group like yours, which is a touch point, which is receiving dollars from these research entities. And one of the figures I found while I was working there was that 60% of all economic growth in the country is due to these innovation and research investments that go largely unseen.
Yeah.
So what do you think would happen if we were to reduce those investments, maybe not entirely, but substantially? What happens from an international defense perspective, and maybe even from an economic perspective, if you end up with a gap? Let's say you have 10 years before it picks back up again. What's the ripple effect of that?
We will be surprised.
How so?
Well, 9/11 was a surprise. So if you look back in our history, we as a country strategically have been surprised any number of different times. We've been, resilient. We've had investments necessary that we could quickly ramp up and get over that surprise and get ahead of our competitors. That could be in warfare, that could be in business or anywhere else.
Right.
If we don't, my feeling is if we aren't constantly investing in the future, then we will be surprised by the future, and that could be detrimental in a number of different ways.
How does that translate for an individual? How do they understand what would be detrimental?
That's the toughest thing to get across, because then you're just talking about human traits, behaviors, and characteristics, and how do you change that? Because we're a species that we're looking for gratification here and now.
Sure.
It's not just today's generation; it's been in every other generation. What's in it for me today?
Yeah.
There's a few folks that can reach beyond that, and that's hopefully who we select as our leaders, or that are in important positions that can continue to paint a vision for us as a society. Failure to have that is we will be looking for immediate satisfaction or gratification. and how you kind of help people try to see the value of that in the future is a very tough bridge to cross. I think it's very hard to think about, well, what's in it, But think if you just sit around and say, well, I don't only have my kids, but I have grandchildren. What do I want for them?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Isn't that a little bit, though, what we do in simulation?
Well, that's what we do in the entertainment industry, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
This is what the future could be.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really positive, and sometimes it's a dystopian
scenario. It's not. Yeah, it's not pleasant. Think about it.
So one of the things, I sat through a brief once. I was actually a little surprised that they shared this, and I'm not even sure if the speaker fully understood what she was showing. She was not a researcher.
Yeah.
And what she was showing was the investment dollars that the U.S. is putting in for research and the investment dollars that China is putting into research. And she showed the graph, and it was a crossover graph, right, where it was showing that the U.S. is dropping off in the amount of research dollars that we're investing, and China is ramping up. And the crossover was very soon, where they would be putting more towards it than we would be. What was compelling to me, though, was not the amount of money, it was the nature of the money. They were looking at high-risk, high-return results. We were looking more at the industry-safe here and now.
Right.
When that happens in defense, what does that look like in our readiness factor to be able to respond to those surprises?
I think we have any number of examples. I mean, you look at some of our major warfighting platforms, if you just think about the potential of the future, they're at severe risk. You think about how we just these recent wars, with security and stability operations and counterterrorism or working in Iraq or Afghanistan, we've had this focus where we're very stable. We are infrastructure intense. When the next potential major engagement, we're going to have to be disaggregated and dispersed, and still have the ability to come together and then disaggregate. Yeah. And at that point in time, without creating a high value target for the enemy that's going to have a capability of immediately being able to figure out where we are and target us. Yeah. And that's just compounded in so many different ways. I mean, we sit and do research, or we look at our operating systems, combat operating systems, almost sometimes in a vacuum of, well, it works here in the United States. And having been at the far reaches of the empire, when our network pipes back here are this big, and then pretty soon I'm down to a soda straw.
Yep.
And all of our systems have been designed like this, and then I'm here. That, I can remember in the invasion of Iraq, where there was a need, the requirement to have a VTC on our tactical nets, 1 hour a day. Any number of our operating systems we had to shut down just in order to support that 1 hour VTC, which, in my opinion, had no value besides.
For people who don't know, it's a virtual communication.
You would be able to, it's like getting on Skype and saying, okay, I need to do this, but it took all of our bandwidth, except for 1 or 2 systems, and we're still fighting. I mean, it's not like, hey, enemy, we're going to take a time out now. And for this hour, everything's.
It's not like football where you get 3 timeouts.
You don't get a timeout. So you can see where it's this constant tug, and you can only you just have to rely on people with experiences, and as long as they can keep thinking outside of that box and their own paradigms, they've got to really open it up and say, okay, what are the second, third, and fourth order effects of anything I do, to make sure you're thinking about how you mitigate those. And I think strategically we have to think about that more so than ever, because the enemy's going to make an advancement, and we may be relying on everything. We already see it now in cyber defense and cybersecurity issues, and what they can do and what they can't do. I mean, literally, they could shut down the entire grid of the country. Well, then what?
I know. I often say, put a gun in the hands of a bad guy, and he takes out everyone in the room. Give him a bomb, he takes out the building. Give him a computer, he wipes out the town. And that is absolutely true. Through so many different mechanisms, they can access information. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't understand. If there was one major lesson, although I had many, one major lesson in representing the U.S. at NATO was that although we are the largest nation and we have the most money, we're also slower because of it.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just make changes. We're not as agile as they would say. And what I found is there were many other nations that maybe were not as technologically savvy or as financially empowered as we were, but their ability to work around systems, their ability to empower an individual who's super brilliant to be able to have the space to be able to try different things, whether that be from an offensive or a defensive perspective, was very high. They could change laws immediately in some cases. We actually had that experience where we were tripping into some personal data spaces and the lawmakers just come to the meeting. That's an asset when we can have those that test information available to us without us having to expend the dollars, get the permissions, or test with our people. Yeah. I'm not sure everybody realizes those benefits, and I'm really sure people don't understand what is the underground groups of individuals in a terrorism type scenario, what can they get access to that we're not necessarily always preparing for? Because the assumption is always, because we're so large and we have the most money, we have the best technology, we have the best fleet, but now you're on this micro space and they just have to get in.
Yeah, well, they have speed to their advantage, and it's not physical speed. It's the speed of thought, speed of thinking, speed of reaction. You know, we saw that in combat where they could change, or we used to refer to it, you know, in the military, you got the 3-year course content review cycle and everything else. Well, the enemy's course content review cycle in combat was less than 24 hours. I mean, they could do an action here, see our response, and be able to share that information, and then you'd see those tactics popping up in other places. Sometimes it was longer, but you could see successful action in one location, and where we were, in Lombard province, immediately popping up in other places. That's how quick they can be. And we had said, okay, our tactics, techniques, and procedures for these kinds of things is XYZ. Well, how rapidly can I change XYZ based on the enemy going, well, okay, XYZ, ABC. And it's the old spy versus spy, but now in combat, it's kind of critical. Yeah. So it's the speed of action, speed of adjustment, and adaptation that, you know, even though you may have all the, you know, the most money and the most combat power, it's immaterial if the enemy can outthink you, or, you know, the asymmetric, you know, thought process that they can apply. Okay, how to reduce and diminish the enemy's center of gravity or their critical capability? Right. Well, all I got to do is this, and it could be low cost.
So now we're getting a little bit into my space of accelerating the capabilities of the mind.
Yes.
One of the things that former Secretary Mattis would talk a lot about was 20 bloodless battles before you go in to theater. And I know in the past that often involved a lot of reading. Read all of these books. Make sure that you're keeping up your Marine Corps reading list. A lot of people don't realize there is a reading list.
Yep.
But
Marines can read. Yeah.
Yes. It's more the requirement. I never have any doubt. But simulation and the ability to model possibilities is a game changer in many ways for increasing the rapidness of thought process, for empowering the individual to be able to think strategically, even though they may not have the experience of a 20-year individual who's been in. They are still accelerating their capabilities. So tell me a little bit about maybe one of the examples that you've done here, where you all have focused on empowering the individual to be able to more rapidly gain, maybe not entirely that, I call it artificial experience, right? You in some ways, not 100%, but in some ways start to take on those artificial or virtual reality moments as part of your library, if you will, so that when you're in that high stress situation, you have more choices than guessing.
Yeah, well, I think that's where you have to look at it. And it has to be done right, but you know, there's one, you know, from the dinosaurs like myself, you're thinking about, hey, just give me more bullets, give me more time, give me more fuel, and I'll be able to train my force to whatever, and an area to do that in. Well, and no other distractions. Well, that's not real life. So then you have to see, okay, how can I create those kind of experiences? Kind of goes back to that book, Talent Code, and the 10,000 hours. But those are 10,000 good hours of study and practice. So what simulations provide is the ability, if you're thinking through it. What are the kind of conditions I want to create to be able to run folks through to see if they recognize those conditions? If I don't, can I provide them intelligent feedback? And then can I run it through that scenario again? But I'm going to change some of the variables every time. It's just like football players. You see football players now, quarterbacks, they're using virtual reality systems to let the quarterback and or other players be able to recognize different and even nuances of the opposing player, what they may be doing to get, oh, okay, that means they're gonna break right or break left, they're gonna blitz, they're not gonna blitz, right. And that's a constant thing. So when you talk about simulations, and for these young men and women, especially, I think it's tactical, not so much the strategic, but you could use it for strategery. But if you think about the tactical level, right. How can I get, and the fidelity doesn't have to be great if I focus on what do I want them to be able to recognize and see, be able to make decisions, assess and evaluate those decisions, give them feedback, and then do it again, and do it again, and do it again. But all in, good, well thought out, different types of scenarios, so that, and I don't want to have them do the same thing every time.
Right.
It's almost like the work we did on the Combat Hunter program is, we always took this as, how do I get someone to go into any different location, or establish your baselines, and then be able to understand what are the anomalies I want to start picking out. From those anomalies and the series or combination of those anomalies, they may mean danger, they may mean I need to go question something, or I got to go kill something. And I think that's with the power of simulation, is and it needs to be accessible. I don't need a physical structure. I don't need to go on and schedule it. And that's where virtual reality serious game type environments, and they have to have consequences. Like the one program I worked on, it was a virtual reality trainer, and we got a shock belt and we put it on folks. So if they were in there, it wasn't a prison restraint belt, but it was a brick. Oh yeah. I think we got that weight, but but the point was, if they went in there and they were playing it like they play a game, right. And they were making bad tactics, they got shocked because they got shot by the virtual entity that was in there. Boy, the next time they were in the virtual world, they were looking for cover, they were looking for concealment, they were talking to each other, they were doing the kinds of things. But that physical response from doing one bad action was almost an immediate teaching point. It's like teaching a child, that pan is hot. You can explain all you want until they touch it. Then they immediately equate, and it burns into their memory. Hot means ouch.
Right.
But if you look at how you can design these systems, but it takes some work. I mean, the real advantage or opportunity now is if I can get to a point where artificial intelligence, machine learning allows me to be able to plug in a set of variables or conditions I want to create, start spitting out these intelligence scenarios. You're interacting with the opposing force and civilians and everything in those scenarios, and doing any number of those tactical events. Then I build up enough of those repetitions necessary and skills, so when they go into a real life, the mind will start piecing those together, and it's like reading 1,000 books, but now I'm having you read 1,000 tactical battles, and these are and what I think one of the things you said about 25 battles, what I've seen is we're equating 25 battles to 25 individual specific lane training events.
Right.
Which is the wrong way to look at it, because a tactical action is a series of making decisions on what lane training events I've been trained on.
Right.
So it's not a lane. No. It's because every action I take may cause another different tactic or reaction. If I get ambushed, what do I do? Do I try to flank? Do I hold? And then that can continue. So it's not a lane. A battle is a series of decisions I have to make through the conditions that are created.
Well, that points out a really good distinction, right? Our assumption oftentimes is sets and reps. So here's my one thing I need to learn. I do it over and over and over and over and over again. And then I'm going to get into theater and I'm going to line up in a series these various things that I've learned. When in fact what ends up happening is every decision locks me in, much like a maze, to a finite set of other decisions, which then locks me in. And if I take too many wrong steps, my ability to get back is either at minimum hindered, if not blocked. So you have to understand the entirety of those decision points, not simply the action. And that is something that simulation can bring to the table that people don't.
Yeah, it's
often
Boyd's
realize.
OODA loop, and that's not one. That's just a series
Right.
of
Right.
observe, orient, decide, act.
Yep.
And you're just constantly going through that because the enemy is constantly changing. They're reactive. I mean, you're fighting another human being, and they're not going to keep doing the same thing. If it's unsuccessful, they're going to do something different. How quickly can you do things that they're reacting to you? So your action is causing them to react, and you're already thinking 2 or 3 plays later where you can continue to put them in a position of disadvantage.
So it's like making many of our military men and women chess players.
Yeah, in a sense, well, that's very true. I mean, are we going to play checkers or play chess?
Well, I mean, we're going to have to, because that's the position we're starting to go into, right? As we get into cyber, and as we get into that individual or small unit impacts, like you said, sometimes we're going to be disaggregated. So we have to empower the people to be able to understand not only their tactical space, but how it causes a ripple effect or impacts to all the other.
Well,
groups.
yeah, and that's when you talk about the Army's Mission Command and Marine Corps' maneuver warfare, and why commander's intent is so important, because in the absence of communications and so forth, you don't have to wait for orders or ask, and we didn't do it perfect in the 1st Marine Division on March up, but it was pretty clear what the end state was and what the goal was, and then the fundamental, no better friend, no worse enemy, do no harm, and how we acted. But I remember that intent was very clear even when we were just. And everybody was connected somehow, but when you're talking about a higher level, those regimental commanders, battalion commanders weren't able to communicate. Well, what do I do now? Or I'm going to do this. No, you saw an opportunity and you acted on it. If it got you 1 foot, 1 mile, 10 miles further, that was the intent. You weren't disregarding the things that could happen to you, but it was get to Baghdad as quickly as possible and making sure that this regime falls. Because the longer you're out in the field, the more opportunity you're setting yourself up for take counterattacks. Right. But don't give them a chance to counter, because you're moving so fast to do things. But a good, clear commander's intent and guidance. And what we issued out a base order that was only less than 40 pages long, which in a division order was pretty phenomenal. And then we had multiple frags, but those frags were disseminated so quickly. Sometimes they were just. The frags we developed were just to retain history, because they'd already been thinking about what to do. So we just said, okay, but sometimes we were catching up to what the regiments were doing, just to make sure that, when you piece this all together, there was a coherent plan on how we did things.
So can I take that as an analogy to what we need to do in research? We talked a little bit earlier. I'd like to close out with kind of what would be our next goal.
Yeah.
And as we think about that, what is commander's intent? How does that get communicated? How does that hit all the groups that are making decisions independently sometimes? And then what it is they need to report back becomes very important, because then it impacts almost the web, if you will. Yeah. Thinking about that from a research perspective, this is something we've talked about before, and many of our colleagues talk about, that we're very rarely clear on what is, at least metaphorically, a commander's intent of how all the research connects. If you could make a recommendation, what would be 1 or 2 things that you think we could take a step forward in doing a better connection? Because something that's very different about research that we don't see in military is that when you're active duty, or you've been you're retired or separated, you live in a very clear swim lane of order. Mm-hmm. Once you bring in civilian researchers, and you bring in commercial builders, and you bring in money and other things that come into this space, that culture doesn't always connect. Although I do often joke, I didn't serve in the military, but I've certainly been professionally raised by them. Right. because I've learned where my swim lane ends and where the next one begins, because I feel it's an incredibly first starting point for civilian researchers that work military, that you've got to know what information our active duty folks need to hear and which things we need to percolate on without gumming up the system. So this creates a very complex web. Mm-hmm. What can we do to start, one, being better about what that commander's intent is at multiple levels, and then two, better communicating so that we're not redundant or creating gaps.
Yeah, I think that's a very challenging issue because each one of your services, Department of Defense, so if you think, what's your strategic end state and goals in the future? What do you want that to look like? And then working backwards to figure out where you should have certain investments. And I think sometimes you have to be careful about over focusing on a specific platform, material solution as you're looking at what are those other non-material. I think, a lot of people equate, what was it, Einstein said, if I had an hour to save the world, I'd take 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes to, come up with a solution.
Right.
And I think that's what we lack right now. We haven't really really sat down and taken a long-term, in accounting for your short-term needs, the ability to think and identify what is the problem? What is the problem that we face, or problems that we face? Because I think once you're able to define what those problems are, then you can say, okay, I've got these things and I'm missing these things. So my investment strategy for research should be looking at filling in those gaps and then figuring out at what point in time do I want these to merge. And then I've got this plan to keep merging and retaining a certain amount of, in the military we always keep a reserve or identify a group as a reserve. Well, we might want to be doing that in the research side of things. And although I have X number of dollars, well, a certain amount of those dollars are going to be placed in reserve to take advantage of opportunities or discoveries that I can pull through quickly to start fitting into this piece. But I think it really depends because of different discipline. The Air Force will focus on certain things, the Navy, Marines and Army will focus on different things. My focus is on these young men and women that we're asking to go put their lives at stake and the problems we face. So I think I can give them better material and everything else, but if I haven't reinforced the most important 6 inches on the battlefield between their ears, and their ability to use the capabilities we're giving them, the weapons we're giving them, the tools we're giving them, and being able to choose the right tools in the toolbox to be able to go out there and do the things the country's asking them to do, then we're going, we run the risk of squandering them or taking unnecessary casualties. Because everything, if you think about everything we have in the military, it really comes down to, it's going to be those kids are on the battlefield and they're doing the nation's bidding, but they're there. Everything else is built to support them, either to completely defeat the enemy so they can walk up the objective, which will never happen, or somehow supporting them so that they can take an objective and take the least number of casualties possible. Everything's supporting them. So how do I make them better at being able to think about the tools that they have to use and how to use them?
It's all about readiness, making sure they're ready in the moment that they don't know is going to present.
Well, readiness, yeah. I mean, this is not, as we found out prior to invading Iraq and preparing for that, this wasn't, it didn't fit into the force deployment model, did it?
Nope.
This is what I have, and this is what I have today, so how do I make the most out of what I had? And so we had battalions that were this ready, and we had battalions that are this ready. This is what we have, And so we did everything we could to keep raising these units that we're on that cycle. How do we give them rapid, intense training, manning, and everything else to build up that cohesion so that when we're asked to cross the line of departure, they were all at or near par across the board. Because we were going to have to use every one of those regiments, every one of those battalions, every one of those companies, every one of those platoons and squads.
Wow.
So that's, readiness is, readiness is an everyday thing. This is not the next deployment or the next, they have to be ready all the time. So how do we do the things necessary to make sure that they're always going to be ready?
I would almost expand that across the country. How do we make sure we're ready for environmental changes? How do we make sure we're ready for a global economy, for automation, for everything?
Yeah, well, that's a different subject outside my sphere of expertise.
I think we could learn a lot from this space.
Yeah.
And it was certainly one of the big finds that I had in government was DoD is shockingly advanced, but it's although it's all the content is military, the application could be very beneficial across the departments.
Oh yeah.
And I think more sharing and communication would be very beneficial.
Yeah, oh yeah. Lessons learned from different ways of tackling problems.
Exactly. I totally agree. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today.